I thought I had found my person. I thought we were the kind of couple that didn't need the big white wedding or the thousands of dollars in flowers to prove our love was real. We eloped, just the two of us, a quiet promise made in the soft light of a memory I still can't quite let go of. It was supposed to be our secret, our foundation. But standing there today, looking at the empty space on the bed where he used to sleep, I'm forced to face a reality I've been running from for years. How do you save a marriage when you aren't just fighting for your husband's heart, but fighting an entire army of his best friends who have spent every waking moment trying to tear you down? And more importantly, how do you stay with a man who lets them do it? The moment I realized my life was a lie wasn't a single explosion. It was a slow, agonizing leak. It started with a vibration on a nightstand. You know that feeling when you see a name pop up on a screen and your entire stomach just drops? That's how it began. My husband and I were supposed to be in that honeymoon phase, that blissful period where the rest of the world fades into the background. But in our house, the world was always invited in. Specifically, his world. Before we even got to the I do, there was the shadow of his past. He had an ex, let's call her Sarah. They had a long history, a sexual history, and apparently a texting history that didn't stop just because I entered the picture. I'm not a jealous person by nature, but I believe in boundaries. I told him clearly and calmly, if we're going to be serious, I need you to close that door. It makes me uncomfortable. He looked me in the eyes, held my hand, and promised he would. He told me I was the only one, but a year later, a full year into our committed relationship, I found out the truth. He hadn't stopped. He had been texting her behind my back the entire time. And here's the kicker, the part that still makes my blood boil when I think about it. When she finally asked him why he was being distant, or why he eventually had to pull back, he didn't say, I'm choosing my partner. He didn't say, I've moved on. He told her, my girlfriend is making me stop talking to you. In one sentence, he turned me into the villain of his story, so he could remain the nice guy in hers. He didn't own his choice. He used me as a shield to protect his image with a woman he shouldn't have been talking to in the first place. That was the first time I felt like I was standing on shifting sand. But I loved him. I thought, we can move past this. I thought eloping would change things. I thought that by making it official, by becoming a we, he would finally start acting like a teammate. But then there was the group. If you've ever been the outsider in a tight-knit circle of friends, you know the feeling. It's like being a guest in a house where you aren't allowed to sit on the furniture. His friends were everything to him, especially Mark. Mark is the kind of guy who sucks the oxygen out of every room he enters. He's the life of the party, the one who decides what's cool and what isn't. And for some reason, my husband worshipped at the altar of Mark's opinion. I started noticing things early on. Little microaggressions that felt like paper cuts. I'm Indian, and the group was not. We'd be sitting at a bar, the music thumping, drinks flowing, and someone would lean in and make a joke about whether Indian people smell, or some comment about thick accents. I'd freeze. My heart would race, and I'd look at my husband, waiting for him to say something, anything. I was waiting for him to be the man I married, and tell his friends that they were being disrespectful to his wife, but he never did. He'd just laugh nervously or look away. And later, when we were alone in the car, he'd tell me I was being too sensitive or too negative. He'd say, they didn't mean anything by it, that's just how they are. It's a lonely feeling, sitting in a room full of people and realizing the person who is supposed to have your back is actually siding with the people stabbing it. Then there were the women in the group. There was this girl, Lily. Lily didn't seem to understand the concept of personal space, or maybe she just didn't care. We'd be out, and she would literally try to sit on his lap, right in front of me. I'm sitting 3 feet away, and she's treating my husband like a piece of playground equipment. I brought it up to him privately. I told him, "This is disrespectful to me and our marriage. You need to tell her to stop." He'd nod. He'd agree. He'd say, "You're right, I'll handle it." But when the next weekend rolled around and we were back in that circle, nothing changed. He'd act like everything was normal. He'd let her touch his arm, grab his phone, lean into his space. It was like he was two different people. In the quiet of our home, he was my husband. But the moment Mark or Lily or the rest of the pack showed up, he became a ghost of the man I loved. He would switch up instantly, downplaying our relationship and acting like he was just one of the guys, completely unattached to the woman standing right next to him. The tension started building like a pressure cooker. I felt like I was losing my mind. Was I the problem? Was I being controlling for wanting my husband not to have other women on his lap? Was I being negative for not wanting to hear racist jokes about my heritage? I started to doubt my own reality because he was constantly gaslighting me into thinking my boundaries were actually burdens. And then there was Nina. Nina was part of the inner circle, and for a while I actually thought she was my friend. I confided in her. I told her how much it hurt when Lily crossed those lines. I thought I had an ally. I didn't know then that Nina had a secret of her own, a past situationship with my husband that he had conveniently forgotten to mention to me. Everything came to a head on election night. The air was already thick with political tension, and Nina decided to post something online, a pointed jab saying, "All my friends support Trump except me." It felt targeted. It felt like she was trying to isolate me even further from the group. I'd had enough. I was tired of being the punching bag for this friend group while my husband stood by and watched. I messaged her privately. I called her out. I told her it was low, and I told her how I felt. I didn't realise that by standing up for myself, I was walking right into a trap. Nina didn't respond to me. Instead, she took private messages I had sent her a year ago, messages where I was being vulnerable about my insecurities in the marriage, and she blasted them to the entire group. She shared them with Lily. She shared them with Mark. Within an hour, the entire social circle had turned into a firing squad, and I was the only target. I reacted. I'm not proud of it, but I'm human. I was hurt, betrayed, and cornered. I said some harsh things. I lashed out at the people who had spent months making me feel small. And in that moment, the narrative was sealed. I wasn't the wife who was being disrespected. I was the crazy, emotional, controlling wife who was trying to pull my husband away from his loyal friends. When I looked at my husband that night, hoping for a shred of loyalty, I didn't see a partner. I saw a man who was terrified of losing Mark's approval. Mark, who had a history of sabotaging relationships, was now whispering in my husband's ear. Mark had already convinced another friend in the group, Alex, not to date certain women. He was the puppet master, and my husband was just another string. I remember the first time he brought up breaking up. It was October. The leaves were turning, the air was getting cold, and he sat me down and told me he didn't know if he could do this anymore. I was devastated. We eloped! We were supposed to be forever. We tried to work on it, or at least I thought we did. But the shadow of that group was always there, looming over us. By January, the conversation happened again. This time it felt different. It felt like the decision had already been made for him. I told him, "Go talk to Mark, sort it out. If you're so worried about what they think, go clear the air." He went. He came back and told me everything was fine. I even offered to talk to Mark myself to finally end the drama and move forward. But he wouldn't let me. He blocked it. And shortly after that, he ended everything. Now he's gone. He's back with them. He's back in the circle that mocked my heritage, disrespected our boundaries, and cheered when our marriage crumbled. And I'm sitting here, in the silence, wondering if I'm the one who failed. I'm wondering if I should still be fighting for a man who chose a life of the party over a life with me. The silence in the house after he left was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It wasn't just the absence of his voice or the sound of the TV in the other room. It was the absence of the person I thought was my anchor. When you're in a relationship like that, you spend so much time fighting for air that you don't realize how exhausted you are until the fighting stops. But the exhaustion didn't bring peace. It brought a million questions that started eating me alive from the inside out. Was I really the problem? That was the thought that kept me up at 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling. He had said it so many times, that I was too negative, that I was always pointing things out, that I was the reason the vibe was always ruined. I started looking back at every argument, every tearful conversation in the car on the way home from a party, wondering if I had just been too demanding. Was it really too much to ask for him not to have another woman sitting on his lap? Was it negative to feel hurt when his friends made jokes about my heritage? The gaslighting is a slow poison. It doesn't happen all at once. It's a series of small moments where your reality is shifted just a few inches to the left until you don't know where the truth ends and the lies begin. I remembered the move. We were supposed to be starting our life together, moving into our own space, building our sanctuary. But even that was tainted. His roommate and Mark, always Mark, had sat him down and told him I was manipulating him into moving out. They used words that felt like they were ripped out of some toxic playbook. They called me controlling. They made misogynistic comments about how I was taming him or taking him away from the boys. And instead of defending me, instead of saying, "Hey, this is my wife and we're building a future," he just looked torn. He'd come home to me and agree that they were being unfair, but the next day he'd be right back there, soaking in their influence. It was like he was a different person depending on who was standing in front of him. With me, he was the loving husband who eloped in secret because he couldn't wait to be mine. With them, he was a guy who was handling a difficult woman. The racism was the hardest part to swallow because it felt like a betrayal of my very identity. Being Indian in a group where no one else looks like you is already isolating. You're always hyper-aware of your presence. So, when the jokes started, the comments about how Indian people smell, the legal immigrant versus illegal comparisons, it felt like a physical blow. One girl in the group actually had the audacity to say, right in front of me, "You're fine as a legal immigrant, but all these Mexicans are coming into our country." I looked at her, stunned. I looked at the group, waiting for someone to say, "That's not okay." And then I looked at my husband. He stayed silent. He didn't want to cause a scene. He didn't want to be the one to break the fun atmosphere. In that moment, I realized that his desire for social approval from a group of mediocre people was stronger than his desire to protect the dignity of the woman he supposedly loved. He was willing to let me be insulted and dehumanized just so he wouldn't have to deal with an awkward 5-minute conversation. That's the negativity he talked about. My reaction to being disrespected was the problem, not the disrespect itself. If I had just stayed quiet, if I had just smiled through the insults and ignored the girls touching him and the friends undermining our marriage, everything would have been fine. But fine is just another word for silent suffering. I think about Mark a lot. I try to understand the hold he had over my husband. Mark was the architect of so much of our misery. I watched him do it to others too. There was this guy in the group, Alex. Every time Alex started seeing someone new, Mark would find a way to dismantle it. He'd tell the girls Alex wasn't good for them, or he'd whisper to the guys that the girls were trouble. He was a gatekeeper of everyone's happiness, and for some reason, the group treated his word like gospel. My husband saw this. He knew Mark did this. And yet, he still deferred to him. He still valued Mark's opinion on our marriage more than mine. When we were at our breaking point in January, and I told him to go talk to Mark, I was desperate. I thought, if he just hears from Mark that it's okay for us to be happy, maybe he'll finally commit to us. But that's not how people like Mark work. Mark doesn't want people to be happy. He wants them to be loyal to the group. When my husband came back from that talk and said everything is fine, only to end things shortly after, I knew what had happened. Mark hadn't given him his blessing. He had given him his exit strategy. The betrayal of the leaked messages still stings. Nina, the girl I thought I could trust, the girl who had been in a situationship with my husband that he never told me about, she was the one who pulled the trigger. She took my vulnerability and turned it into a weapon. She showed the group my private thoughts, my insecurities about Lily and the lap-sitting, and she framed it as me being crazy, and the group ate it up. They had been looking for a reason to cast me out, and I gave it to them on a silver platter. I reacted emotionally. I said things I regret. I called them out for their behaviour, but in their eyes, that just proved they were right about me all along. I was the toxic one. I was the drama. But here's the thing about drama. It usually only exists where there is a lack of boundaries. If my husband had set a boundary with Sarah, his ex, on day one, there would have been no drama. If he had told Lily to get off his lap the first time it happened, there would have been no drama. If he had told his friends that racist jokes weren't welcome around his wife, there would have been no drama. He didn't want drama, but by refusing to stand up for anything, he created a vacuum that the drama filled. Now that we're separated, I'm haunted by the idea of fixing it. People tell me, you're married, you have to try therapy. And a part of me, the part of me that remembers the elopement, the quiet nights when it was just us, the man who once promised to propose in public because he was so proud to have me. That part of me wants to believe therapy could work. I want to believe that if a professional sat him down and explained what a boundary was, he would finally understand. But then I see where he is now. He didn't take this time to reflect. He didn't go into isolation to figure out who he is without the influence of others. He went straight back to them. He's back in the circle. He's back with Mark, back with Lily, back with the people who cheered for the end of our marriage. If a man chooses the people who disrespect you over the woman who loves him, is there really anything left to save? Or am I just trying to perform CPR on a ghost? I look at my phone, wanting to text him, wanting to suggest a counsellor, wanting to ask if he even misses the us we were supposed to be. But then I remember the feeling of being the only person in the room who was actually fighting for us. The hardest part of this entire nightmare isn't the big, explosive fights. It's the quiet, lingering what-ifs. I keep looking at my hand, at the space where my wedding ring used to sit, and I think about the proposal that never happened. We eloped because we wanted something that was just for us. It was romantic, or at least that's what I told myself at the time. He promised me that we'd do it right later. A big public proposal, a celebration where he could show the world how much he loved me. He talked about it constantly in the beginning. He had plans, he had ideas. But as the months turned into years, those plans didn't just fade. They were actively pushed aside. Every time I'd bring it up, he'd have an excuse. The timing isn't right with the guys. Or, Mark thinks we should wait until things settle down with the group. Eventually, the public part of our relationship became a secret he was keeping from his friends. It was as if being proud of me, being publicly committed to me, was a betrayal of the boys' club. I was the secret wife, the woman who lived in the shadows of his social life, while he played the role of the fun, available friend whenever Mark called. I realised now that the public proposal was the first boundary he let them break. By letting his friends influence when and how he chose to celebrate our marriage, he gave them a seat at our table before the meal had even been served. And then there was Sarah. I think about that year of lies more than I should. It wasn't just that he was texting an ex. People have histories, I get that. It was the nature of the texts. It was the way he spoke to her as if he was still a single man, or at the very least, a man who wasn't fully claimed. When I finally saw those messages, my heart didn't just break, it shattered. But the real knife in the back was finding out what he said when she finally pushed him on why he was being distant. He didn't say, "I'm in love with my wife." He didn't say, "I'm building a life with someone else." He told her, "She's making me block you." Do you know what that does to a person? It paints you as a jailer. It makes you the warden of a prison your husband is trying to escape. He got to keep his nice guy image with Sarah, appearing as the victim of a controlling woman, while I was left holding the bag of his dishonesty. He never once took accountability. He never once said, "I'm doing this because I value my marriage." It was always, "I'm doing this because she's making me." That pattern followed us into every interaction with his friends. When Lily tried to sit on his lap, and I told him it was unacceptable, he didn't go to Lily and say, "Hey, that's inappropriate, I'm a married man." He probably went to them and complained about how stressed I was making him. I can almost hear the conversations in the group chat. "Man, she's so intense. She's overthinking everything. She's so negative." I started to become the very person they accused me of being. I was negative because there was nothing positive to focus on. I was controlling because I was trying to steer a ship that he was actively trying to sink. I was too sensitive because I was the only one in the room with any nerve endings left. I remember one specific night, shortly after the smell jokes started. We were at a backyard barbecue. The sun was setting, the music was loud, and the drinks were flowing. I was trying so hard to be the cool wife. I was smiling, I was engaging, I was trying to ignore the way Mark looked at me like I was an interloper. Then, one of the guys made a comment about typical Indian parents and some stereotype about arranged marriages. It was crude, and it was meant to be a dig at me. I looked at my husband, my eyes pleading with him to just say, "Hey, knock it off." Instead, he laughed. He actually laughed. It was a weak, nervous laugh, but it was a laugh nonetheless. In that moment, I felt like I was disappearing. I felt like the person I was, my culture, my history, my pride, was being erased so that he could keep the vibe alive for Mark. When we got home and I finally let the tears fall, he didn't hold me. He didn't apologize. He sighed. That long, exasperated sigh that tells you you're being a burden. "Why can't you just let things go?" he asked. "Why do you have to ruin every night with this?" I wasn't ruining the night. The night was ruined the moment his friends decided to be racist, and he decided to be a coward. But in his mind, my reaction was the crime. The racism was just the guys being the guys. My pain was drama. That's when Nina entered the picture. Nina was the cool girl of the group. She was the one who could hang with the guys, the one who didn't make a scene. I thought she was different. I thought that because she was a woman, she might understand how isolated I felt. I didn't know then about the situationship they'd had. He never told me. I had to find that out through the grapevine, piece by piece, like a puzzle I never wanted to solve. I had confided in Nina about Lily. I told her how much it hurt to see another woman act like my husband was her property while he did nothing to stop it. I thought I was talking to a friend, but Nina wasn't a friend. She was a spy for the group. The night of the election, when she posted that "all my friends support Trump except me" thing, it wasn't about politics. It was about dominance. It was her way of telling the world and the group that I didn't belong. I was the outlier. I was the other. When I messaged her, I was firm. I told her it was a low blow. I told her I didn't appreciate being singled out like that. I thought I was standing up for myself. I didn't know she was waiting for that exact moment. She took those messages, and messages from a year prior where I was crying about my marriage, and she shared them with everyone. Imagine the feeling of knowing that your most private, painful moments are being passed around a group chat like a joke. Imagine knowing that Lily, the girl who tried to sit on your husband's lap, is now reading your deepest insecurities and laughing about them with Mark. I lost it. I admit it. I sent angry texts. I said things that were harsh. I called them what they were: toxic, manipulative, and small-minded. But because I was the one who exploded, I became the villain. My husband didn't see the months of provocation. He didn't see the leaked messages as a betrayal of trust. He saw my reaction as the reason the group was uncomfortable. He started distancing himself from me, even as we were supposed to be moving into our new home. Mark and his roommate were in his ear every day, telling him I was manipulating him. They used his own guilt against him. They made him feel like he was losing his freedom, when in reality he was just being asked to be a husband. The most confusing part is that he would agree with me in private. He'd hold me and say, "I know they're being assholes. I know Mark is out of line." But the moment he walked out that door, the moment he picked up his phone, that version of him vanished. He was a man with two faces, and I was the only one who saw the one that was crumbling. By the time January rolled around, I was a shell of myself. I was so desperate to save us that I told him to go to Mark. I thought, if he can just fix it with them, maybe he can focus on us. I sat at home, waiting for him to come back from that meeting. I had dinner ready. I was prepared to apologize for my outbursts. I was prepared to do whatever it took. He came home and told me, "Everything is fine. Mark and I are good." I felt a wave of relief. "Great," I said. "Let's sit down with them. I'll talk to Mark. We'll clear the air and move past this." But his face went cold. "No," he said. "That's not going to happen." A week later, he told me it was over. He didn't want to fix it. He didn't want therapy. He didn't want to be a husband. He wanted to be one of the guys again. He wanted the approval of a man who sabotages every relationship he sees. He wanted the vibe back. And now, as I sit here looking at the ruins of what I thought was a lifelong commitment, I have to ask myself, was there ever really an us? Or was I just a temporary guest in his life? Someone he eloped with on a whim, but didn't have the courage to actually stand beside. The hardest thing to wrap your head around when you're in a marriage like this is the double life. It's a term usually reserved for people with secret families or hidden bank accounts. But there's a different kind of double life that's just as destructive. It's the husband who is one person when it's just the two of you, and a completely different person the moment he steps into the light of his social circle. At home, in the quiet of our kitchen, he would hold me. He would listen to me cry about the comments his friends made, and he'd whisper, "I know, I'm so sorry. They don't see you the way I do. They're just being idiots." In those moments, I felt safe. I felt like we were a team against the world. I felt like the woman he eloped with was the only woman who mattered. But that version of him was a ghost. He only existed in the shadows, where no one else could see him. The second we were around Mark or the rest of the group, that man vanished. It was like watching a movie character being played by a different actor halfway through the scene. He would become louder, more dismissive of me, and desperate for their attention. If I tried to bring up something he had agreed with me on just hours before, he'd look at me with this cold, distant expression and say, "Why are you bringing this up now? You're being so negative." It's a special kind of torture to be told you're crazy for remembering something that actually happened. It makes you feel like the floor beneath you is made of water. You start to wonder if you're misremembering the private apologies. You start to wonder if the man who loves you even exists, or if he's just a mask he wears to keep you from leaving. I remember the day we were supposed to move in together. This was supposed to be the start of our real, shared life. We were packing boxes, and I was finally starting to feel a sense of hope. Maybe, I thought, if we have our own place, away from his roommate and the constant revolving door of his friends. We can finally build some boundaries. But Mark and his roommate had other plans. They didn't see a couple starting a life. They saw their buddy being snatched away by a woman they couldn't control. They sat him down, a bro-to-bro intervention, and told him I was manipulating him. They used words like trapped and pussy-whipped. They made misogynistic jokes about how he wouldn't be allowed to have fun anymore once he was under my roof. And my husband, the man who had just promised me forever, didn't tell them to get lost. He didn't tell them that moving in with his wife was his choice and his joy. Instead, he came home looking torn. "They're just worried about me," he said, avoiding my eyes. "Worried about what?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Worried that you're living with your wife? Since when is that a cause for concern?" "You don't understand the bond we have," he replied. That bond was a noose around our marriage's neck. Every time I tried to tighten the knot of our commitment, Mark and the guys were there with a pair of scissors, snipping away at the threads. And my husband just stood there, letting them do it, acting like he was a bystander in his own life. He portrayed himself as a man caught between two worlds, but the truth was simpler. He was a man who refused to choose. And in a marriage, if you don't choose your spouse every single day, you've already chosen someone else. The racism within that group was like a low-frequency hum that I could never turn off. It wasn't always a screaming slur. It was the microaggressions that felt like being poked with a needle over and over again. They'd ask me questions about Indian culture that weren't really questions. They were setups for punchlines. They'd make comments about the food, the traditions, the smell. But the legal immigrant comment, that one stayed with me. We were sitting in a living room, and one of the girls, someone who considered herself a good person, started going on a rant about immigration. She looked me right in the eye and said, "Oh, you're fine. You're one of the good ones. You're a legal immigrant. It's all those Mexicans coming into our country that are the problem." The room went quiet for a heartbeat. I felt the blood rush to my face. I looked at my husband. This was it. This was the moment for him to stand up and say, "That's my wife's heritage you're talking about. That's a human being you're talking about. We don't do that here." Instead, he took a sip of his beer and looked at the TV. Later, when I brought it up, he told me I was overreacting. He said she was actually complimenting me by saying I was fine. "She was using me as a shield to be a bigot," I shouted, "and you let her." "You're just so negative lately," he sighed. "You're always looking for a reason to be offended. Can't we just have one night where you don't make everything about race or boundaries?" I realized then that to him, my dignity was a negative trait. My self-respect was an inconvenience. He wanted a wife who was invisible, someone who would sit quietly in the corner and let his friends treat her like a prop in their lives. He wanted the status of being married without any of the responsibility of being a protector. And then there was Mark's influence. I started seeing how deep the rot went. Mark didn't just interfere in our lives, he was a serial relationship saboteur. I watched him do it to Alex, another guy in the group. Alex would find a girl he really liked, someone who seemed sweet and genuine, and within weeks, Mark would start the whisper campaign. "She's not the right vibe. She's going to change you. She's trying to pull you away from the guys." I saw the pattern, and I pointed it out to my husband. I told him, "Mark doesn't want any of you to be happy. He wants a group of single, loyal followers who have nothing better to do than worship him." My husband defended him. "Mark is just protective. He's been through a lot. He just wants what's best for us." "Is what's best for you a divorce?" I asked. He didn't have an answer for that. Because deep down, I think he knew. He knew that Mark was a toxic force. But he was addicted to the validation. He was addicted to being the life of the party's right-hand man. He'd rather have a failing marriage and Mark's approval than a happy marriage and Mark's disapproval. When Nina leaked my private messages, it was the ultimate betrayal of the safe space I thought I had found. I had confided in her about Lily, the girl who thought my husband's lap was a lounge chair. I had told Nina how much it hurt to feel like a second-class citizen in my own marriage. Nina didn't just share those messages, she curated them. She picked the ones where I sounded the most desperate, the most emotional, the most broken. She showed them to Lily. She showed them to Mark. They laughed. They mocked me. They turned my pain into a Saturday night entertainment. When I found out, I felt like I was losing my mind. I was being gaslit by an entire community. I reached out to Nina and I didn't hold back. I told her she was a snake. I told her she was a coward for hiding behind a screen after pretending to be my friend. And yes, I said some harsh things about the rest of them too, but in the twisted logic of that group, my harsh words were the only crime. The fact that she had violated my privacy and weaponized my trauma was ignored. I was the toxic one because I had the audacity to be angry about being betrayed. I went to my husband, showing him what she'd done. I expected him to be outraged. I expected him to finally say, "That's enough, we're done with these people." Instead, he looked at the messages and said, "Well, you shouldn't have said those things back to her. Now you've made it impossible for me to defend you. You've ruined your own reputation with them." My reputation? I was his wife. My reputation was his reputation. But he saw us as two separate entities. He was the good guy, trying to manage a difficult woman. In October, when he first brought up the idea of a breakup, it felt like the world was ending. But we worked on it. We tried to rebuild. What I didn't realize was that I was the only one building. He was just waiting for the next storm to blow the house down. By January, the storm arrived. And this time, he was the one who opened the windows and let the wind in. He went to Mark to sort things out, and he came back with a death sentence for our marriage disguised as a talk. I sit here now, looking at our elopement photos. The ones he wouldn't let me post, the ones he wanted to keep low-key. And I see the truth. He didn't elope with me because he wanted a private moment. He eloped with me because he was too ashamed of our relationship to stand up to his friends and tell them I was his priority. He kept me in a box, only taking me out when it was convenient for him. And the moment his friends started throwing rocks at the box, he didn't move it. He just let them break it. When he finally said the words, the actual words that ended us, it wasn't a shout. It wasn't a dramatic, movie-style blow-up with glass breaking and neighbours calling the police. It was worse. It was a cold, hollow, "I don't think I can do this anymore." He said it with the same tone a person uses to describe a weather report. After all the fighting, all the pleading, all the times I had swallowed my pride to make him feel comfortable, he just checked out. But the part that really haunts me, the part that keeps me staring at the wall until the sun comes up, is the timing. This didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened right after he went to talk things through with Mark. I had encouraged it. I thought, if he can just clear the air with his best friend, if he can just get Mark to stop seeing me as the enemy, maybe we can have a normal life. I was so naive. I was practically handing my husband the map to the nearest exit and hoping he'd use it to find his way back to me. He came home that night in January and looked me in the eye. He told me everything was fine. He said they had a good talk, that the tension was gone, and that we were going to be okay. I felt this massive weight lift off my chest. I started thinking about the future again. I even suggested we all get dinner, Mark, the guys, everyone, so I could personally apologize for the leaked messages and start fresh. I was ready to grovel for the sake of my marriage, and he looked at me with this strange, distant pity. "No," he said. "That's not necessary." Less than a week later, he was packing a bag. He wasn't leaving because of a big fight. He was leaving because he had finally chosen his side. He had chosen the vibe. He had chosen group chat. He had chosen Mark. The realization hit me like a physical blow. He hadn't gone to Mark to save our marriage. He had gone to Mark to get permission to end it. He needed his big brother figure to tell him it was okay to walk away from his wife. He needed the group to validate his decision so he didn't have to feel like the bad guy. And because he's a man who can't stand being the villain in anyone's story, he waited until he had their full support before he pulled the trigger on us. The separation has been a blur of agonizing silence. But the silence is only on my end, because while I'm sitting here trying to process the death of my marriage, he's already back in the fold. He didn't take a week to mourn. He didn't take a month to reflect on what went wrong. He went straight back to the same bars, the same parties, the same toxic circle that spent the last 2 years systematically dismantling our relationship. I see the social media posts. I don't want to look, but I do. There he is, smiling in the background of a photo at a sports bar. There's Mark, with his arm around him like a trophy. And there's Lily, probably still trying to find a way onto his lap. And Nina, the girl who betrayed my deepest secrets, laughing in the corner. It's like I never existed. It's like the elopement was just a fever dream he's finally woken up from. And yet, despite all of this, the racism, the gaslighting, the emotional abandonment, I'm still here, stuck in the what-ifs. I'm still here wondering if I'm the asshole for wanting to try therapy. Is it crazy to want to save something that feels so clearly dead? I keep telling myself, we're married. We made a commitment. Marriage is supposed to be hard. I keep thinking that if we just got into a room with a professional, someone who could objectively look at the situation and tell him, hey, your friends are toxic and you have no boundaries, maybe he'd finally see it. Maybe the real him, the man who loved me enough to marry me in secret, is still in there somewhere, buried under layers of Mark's influence. But then I have to face the darker truth. Maybe the man I fell in love with was the mask. And this person, the one who lets his friends insult his wife, the one who lies about texting his ex, the one who runs to his boys the moment things get difficult, is the real him. I think about the Sarah situation again. I think about how he spent a year texting her behind my back. That wasn't Mark's fault. Mark didn't hold a gun to his head and tell him to lie to me for 365 days. That was a choice he made. And the way he handled it, telling Sarah that I was the one making him stop, that was his true character shining through. He is a man who avoids conflict at all costs, even if the cost is the heart of the woman he supposedly loves. He didn't want to be the mean guy who broke up with Sarah, so he made me the controlling girlfriend. He didn't want to be the lame guy who stood up for his wife against his racist friends, so he made me the negative wife. He didn't want to be the bad guy who ended a marriage, so he waited until his friends gave him a reason to blame me for it. I feel like I've been screaming into a void for years. Can't you see what they're doing? Can't you see how they treat me? And his response was always to turn the volume down on me so he could hear them better. I've had friends tell me I should be relieved. They say, he showed you who he was. He's a coward. You're only 30. You have so much life left. Why would you want to spend it with someone who won't even hold your hand when the wind blows too hard? And they're right. I know they're right. But when you elope, when you share those quiet, intimate promises that no one else hears, it creates a bond that's hard to break, even when it's hurting you. I keep holding on to the memory of the man who looked at me that day we got married. I keep thinking that if I just try hard enough, if I'm just positive enough, I can bring that man back. But can therapy fix a lack of spine? Can a counsellor teach a 30-year-old man how to have a sense of loyalty? Or am I just asking for a miracle that isn't coming? The most painful part is the feeling of being replaced. Not by another woman, though I'm sure Mark is working on that as we speak, but by the group. I was replaced by a collective of people who don't actually care about his well-being, only his presence. They don't want him to be a happy, whole man. They want him to be a character in their show. And he's so addicted to the applause that he's willing to set his own house on fire just to keep them warm. I'm struggling with the guilt of my own reactions. I keep playing back those angry texts I sent to Nina. I keep thinking, if I hadn't lost my temper, maybe he wouldn't have had an excuse to leave. I'm blaming myself for reacting to the abuse instead of blaming the people who were abusing me. It's the ultimate victory for a gaslighter when the victim starts doing their work for them. I look at my life now, and it's so quiet. No more group chats, no more vibe checks, no more worrying about which of his friends is going to insult my culture today. It should feel like freedom. So why does it feel like I'm standing in the middle of a ruins, trying to glue the broken pieces of a vase back together, while the person who smashed it is already out buying a new one? I've spent a lot of time lately thinking about the word loyalty. We use it so often, don't we? We talk about loyal friends, loyal dogs, loyal partners. But I've learned that loyalty is a double-edged sword. To some people, loyalty means standing by someone even when they're wrong. To others, it means protecting the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. For my husband, loyalty was a currency he spent entirely on people who didn't even like him. They just liked having someone they could control. And then there's Mark. I can't stop thinking about Mark's role in all of this. He's the puppet master of a show that only plays in dive bars and group chats. I remember looking at the way he treated Alex, another guy in their circle. Alex was a good guy, maybe a little too eager to please, just like my husband. Every time Alex found someone he was genuinely interested in, Mark would start the slow, methodical process of poisoning the well. He'd make jokes about the girl's past, or he'd pull Alex aside and tell him he was changing and becoming boring. I watched it happen to 3 different women who tried to date Alex. Mark would find their insecurities, amplify them, and then present them to the group as reasons why the relationship shouldn't work. It was a pattern of behavior that was so obvious to me from the outside, but to the guys in the group, it was just Mark looking out for us. When I brought this up to my husband, back when we were still talking, back when I still thought I could save him, he just shrugged. Mark's just protective of the group, he said. He's seen a lot of people get hurt, but Mark wasn't protecting the group from being hurt. He was protecting his own status as the center of their universe. He couldn't handle the idea of one of his guys having a primary loyalty to a woman. A wife is a threat to a man like Mark because a wife expects the truth. A wife expects growth. A wife expects her husband to come home at the end of the night instead of staying out until 3 a.m. listening to Mark's latest monologue about the good old days. And my husband, he bought into it. He let Mark treat our marriage like an obstacle to be cleared. I think about the elopement every single day. I look at the photos, the ones that are still on my phone, the ones I haven't been able to delete yet. We looked so happy. He looked so sure. But looking back now, through the lens of everything that's happened, I have to wonder, did we elope because it was romantic? Or did we elope because it was the only way he could marry me without having to face Mark's judgment? By keeping it low-key, by delaying the public proposal, by keeping our commitment in the shadows, he was avoiding the inevitable confrontation between his life with me and his life with them. He was trying to have both, but you can't have a marriage and a boys' club that hates your wife. Eventually, the walls are going to come down, and you're going to have to decide which side of the ruins you're standing on. He chose the side with the beer and the vibe. He chose the side where he didn't have to grow up. The racism is the part that still feels like a physical ache in my chest. There's something so dehumanizing about being tolerated by people who clearly think you're lesser. When they made those comments about Indian people smelling, or when they laughed at my accent, even though I've lived here most of my life, they weren't just being idiots. They were testing the waters. They were seeing how much they could get away with before my husband stood up for me, and they found the limit. There was no limit. He would never stand up for me. He would never be the man who says, "That's my wife, and if you can't respect her, you can't be in my life." Instead, he'd wait until we were in the car, and he'd tell me that I was making it a thing. "You're so sensitive," he'd say, gripping the steering wheel. "Why can't you just let them be them? They're just joking around. They don't actually hate Indian people." "Then why are they making the jokes?" I'd ask. "Why am I the punchline of every Saturday night?" "Because you're always so negative. You're looking for reasons to be mad. You're ruining the night for everyone." That's the cycle of gaslighting. You get hurt, you express the hurt, and then you're punished for the expression. Eventually, you stop expressing it. You start swallowing it. You start thinking that maybe you are the problem. Maybe if you were just cooler, or funnier, or less Indian, they would like you. Maybe if you just let Lily sit on his lap and didn't say a word, he'd be proud to have you there. But that's a lie. You can't win a game where the rules are designed to make you lose. Even now, after everything, I find myself searching for a reason to go back. I think about the therapy. I think about a counsellor sitting across from us and finally saying the words I've been screaming for years. I want the validation of a third party. I want someone to tell him, "You failed your wife." But what would that change? If he needs a therapist to tell him that his wife's dignity is more important than Mark's approval, then the marriage was already over before it began. You can't teach someone to care. You can't teach someone to have a backbone. You can't teach a man to be a husband if he's still obsessed with being a bro. I've been stuck in this limbo for months. Part of me is waiting for him to cool. Part of me is waiting for him to wake up one morning, look around at his friends, and realize that he's 30 years old and he's thrown away a woman who loved him for a group of people who would replace him in a heartbeat if he stopped being fun. But the call doesn't come. Instead, I see the photos. I see the life of the party continuing without me. I see Nina, the girl who leaked my secrets, posing with them. I see the group moving on like I was just a glitch in the system that they finally fixed. I keep asking myself, am I for wanting to fix this? Am I the asshole for still believing in the us that existed on the day we eloped? Or am I just the victim of a very long, very painful con? I genuinely don't know if this is something that can be worked through. I don't know if love is enough when there's a complete lack of respect. I look at the ruins of my life and I wonder if I should be trying to rebuild the same house, or if I should just take the lessons I've learned and start building somewhere else. Somewhere far away from Mark. Somewhere far away from the vibe. Somewhere where I can be a person, not a problem. The house feels like a museum of a life that didn't actually happen. I walk through the rooms and see the furniture we picked out together, the rug we argued over for 3 days, the framed photo from the day we eloped that I haven't had the heart to turn face down yet. It's all there. The physical evidence of a marriage exists, but the soul of it feels like it was ghost-written by someone who didn't even like the main characters. I keep going back to Lily. I know it sounds like such a small, petty thing, a girl trying to sit on a guy's lap at a party. In the grand scheme of infidelities or betrayals, it seems minor, right? But it wasn't about the lap sitting. It was about the permission. I remember that night so vividly. The air was thick with the smell of cheap beer and expensive cologne. Lily was buzzing around him like a moth to a flame, and I was standing 5 feet away, a drink in my hand, watching the boundaries of my marriage being tested in real time. When she made her move, when she actually tried to park herself on his knee, I didn't cause a scene. I didn't scream. I just caught his eye. I gave him that look, the please don't let this happen look, and he just smiled. He didn't push her off. He didn't stand up. He just leaned back and acted like it was a joke. When we got home, the argument was exhausted before it even started. It's just Lily, he told me, throwing his keys on the counter. She's like that with everyone. You're making it weird by making it about us. It is about us, I whispered. It's about whether or not you're willing to tell another woman no when she's disrespecting your wife. No, he snapped. It's about you being insecure. It's about you not being able to handle the fact that I have friends who like me. You're trying to put me in a cage, and I'm not going to live like that. That was the cage. The cage was basic respect. The cage was not having other women's bodies on his. In his world, the world Mark built, freedom was the ability to ignore your partner's pain without consequence. And if I pointed out that pain, I was the jailer. I was the controlling one. I think about the public proposal he promised me. It became this carrot on a stick that he dangled in front of me for years. Whenever things got bad, whenever I'd bring up how isolated I felt from his group, he'd bring it up. Once we do the public proposal, everything will change, he'd say. The guys will see how serious we are. Mark will finally understand that you're the one. Just hold on a little longer. I held on until my knuckles were white. I waited for that moment where he would stand up in front of the people who mocked my heritage and dismissed my existence and say, "This is my wife, and I am proud of her." I wanted that public validation, not because I'm vain, but because I was starving for a sign that I mattered more to him than their vibe. But the proposal never came. There was always a reason to delay. Mark's going through a breakup. It's not a good time to be flashy. Or, Alex is having issues with his job. I don't want to rub our happiness in his face. He was so concerned with the feelings of Mark and Alex and the rest of the guys that he never stopped to consider that his wife was dying a slow death of 1,000 cuts. He was protecting their happiness while actively destroying mine. He was a martyr for a group of people who didn't even respect him enough to respect his marriage. The January breakup. I keep replaying it like a movie I'm forced to watch on a loop. We were in the kitchen. It was a Tuesday. Nothing special was happening. He'd just come back from that talk with Mark. I was making tea, thinking we were finally on the path to healing. "I can't do this," he said. "Do what?" I asked, still focused on the kettle. "This. The fighting, the negativity, the feeling like I have to choose between you and my life." I turned around, the steam from the kettle hitting my face. "Your life? I am your wife. I am your life." "No," he said, and his voice was so cold it made my skin crawl. "You're a part of it, but they're a part of it too. And you've made it so that I can't have both. You've made me choose, so I'm choosing." "You're choosing Mark?" I asked, the absurdity of it hitting me. "You're choosing a guy who sabotages every relationship he sees over the woman who eloped with you, over the woman who has been by your side while your friends mocked her for her skin colour. See?" He pointed at me, his finger shaking. "There you go again. Always bringing up the past. Always being negative. This is exactly why I'm leaving. I just want to be around people who make me feel good." "People who make you feel good by letting you be a coward," I shouted. He didn't answer. He just walked out. Since that day, I've been stuck in this cycle of self-doubt. Was I too negative? If I had just ignored the racism, if I had just laughed off Lily, if I had just stayed quiet when Nina leaked my messages, would we still be together? But then I realised what that together would look like. It would look like me disappearing. It would look like me becoming a ghost in my own home. A woman with no voice and no pride, just so he could keep his vibe intact. Is that a marriage? Or is that a hostage situation? I've been reading about narcissism and enmeshment. I've been trying to find a name for what happened to us. I see the way Mark operates. It's like a cult. He's the leader, and the boys are his followers. They trade their individuality for the safety of the pack. And any woman who enters the picture is a threat to that pack mentality. She's a manipulator because she expects her husband to think for himself. She's controlling because she expects him to have priorities that don't involve a Saturday night rager at Mark's house. I reached out to him one last time, a week ago. I suggested therapy. I told him, we're married. We took vows. Even if we didn't do the big wedding, the promise was real. Let's just talk to someone who isn't Mark. Just 1 hour. He didn't even reply. He's already gone. He's back in the group chat. He's back in the circle. He's probably telling them right now about how crazy I am for still trying to trap him in therapy. And they're probably laughing. They're probably telling him he dodged a bullet. They're probably celebrating the fact that they got their buddy back, untethered and unencumbered by the negativity of a woman who wanted him to be a man. So, am I the arsehole for wanting to save a marriage that was never really a partnership? For wanting to fight for a man who wouldn't even lift a finger to defend me? Or am I just a woman who is finally realizing that you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved? I look at my hands. They're shaking. I'm 30 years old, and I feel like I've lived 100 years in the last 3. I'm struggling to figure out if I should keep trying to find a way back to him, or if I should just walk out into the sunlight and never look back. But then I think about the next girl, because there will be a next girl. And unless he changes, unless he finally stands up to Mark, the same thing is going to happen to her. She'll be the new girl. Then she'll be the controlling girlfriend. Then she'll be the negative wife. The cycle will continue because the problem was never me. The problem was the house he built on a foundation of other people's opinions. It's funny how the human brain tries to protect you by rewriting the script of your own life. For a long time, I tried to convince myself that he was just caught in the middle. I pictured him as this tragic figure, a man torn between the love of his life and the friends he'd known since he was a kid. I gave him the grace of a victim. But as the weeks of separation turned into months, the fog started to lift, and I saw something much uglier. He wasn't a victim of his friends. He was a willing participant in my erasure. I think about that phrase he used over and over. You're too negative. It's the ultimate weapon for someone who doesn't want to take responsibility. If you point out that someone is being racist, you're negative. If you point out that a girl is literally trying to sit on your husband's lap, you're negative. If you point out that your husband is lying about texting his ex, you're negative. By labeling my valid emotions as a character flaw, he effectively silenced me. He made it so that any time I stood up for myself, I was actually attacking the peace of the group. I remember one afternoon, before everything completely imploded. We were sitting on the porch of the house we were supposed to be making a home. I looked at him and I asked, "Why do you care so much what Mark thinks? He isn't the one sleeping next to you. He isn't the one building a future with you. Why does his opinion carry more weight than mine?" He didn't even look at me. He just stared out at the street and said, "Mark has always been there for me. Before you, there was Mark. And after you, there'll probably still be Mark. You're the one who keeps making me choose." That was the moment I should have walked away. That was the moment he told me exactly where I stood in the hierarchy of his life. I was a current project, but Mark was the permanent foundation. I was trying to build a skyscraper on a lot that was already occupied by a frat house. The incident with Nina and the leaked messages. That was the turning point where I realized I wasn't just fighting a husband. I was fighting a hive mind. Nina, with her cool girl facade, was the perfect weapon. She had convinced me she was a safe harbor. I had sent her messages in moments of pure, unadulterated heartbreak. I had typed out things like, "I don't know if he even loves me anymore," and "I feel so small when Lily touches him and he does nothing." When she shared those with the group, she didn't just share information. She shared my naked soul with a pack of wolves. She gave them the blueprint of my pain so they could laugh at it. And my husband's reaction wasn't to be disgusted by her cruelty. It was to be embarrassed by my vulnerability. He was more upset that his friends saw the drama than he was that his wife's private heart had been put on display for public mockery. "You shouldn't have been so emotional in those texts," he told me. "You made us look bad." Us. He used the word us to describe the reputation he was trying to protect, not the marriage he was supposed to be honoring. He was more concerned with the brand of our relationship in the eyes of his toxic friends than the actual health of the woman standing right in front of him. And then there's the racism. I can't stop going back to it. Being an Indian woman in a space that is overwhelmingly white and culturally insensitive is a constant exercise in reading the room. You learn to laugh at the small stuff just to get through the night. But when the jokes about smelling and legal immigrants started, it wasn't just a lack of awareness, it was a test. They wanted to see if I would submit to the vibe. And when I didn't, when I spoke up and said it wasn't okay, I became the angry minority who couldn't take a joke. The most painful part was that my husband became one of them in those moments. He didn't just stay silent, he adopted their body language. He'd lean away from me and toward them. He'd mirror their smirks. He was so desperate to be accepted by people who held such casual disregard for my humanity that he was willing to let a piece of me die every Saturday night. How do you fix that in therapy? How do you sit on a couch and ask a man to care about your soul when he's already sold it for a seat at Mark's table? I look at the elopement differently now. At the time, I thought it was our little secret, a beautiful, intimate rebellion against the world. Now I see it as a coward's compromise. He married me in secret because he didn't have the guts to marry me in public. He eloped so he wouldn't have to deal with Mark's comments on the wedding day. He eloped so he wouldn't have to explain to Lily why she wasn't the one in the white dress. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was a containment strategy. He kept our marriage in a box, and the moment the box became too heavy to carry, he just dropped it. I'm struggling with the lost cause aspect of it all. As a wife, you're taught to fight. You're taught that marriage is a marathon, not a sprint. You're told that through thick and thin means you stay, even when it's hard. But what do you do when the thin is a husband who lets his friends treat you like garbage? What do you do when the person who is supposed to be your biggest defender is actually your biggest gaslighter? I see him now, back in the same bars, probably drinking the same beer, listening to Mark tell the same stories. I wonder if he ever feels a pang of guilt. I wonder if, when he's driving home alone to his new place, he misses the woman who saw the best in him even when he was at his worst. Or if he's just relieved that the negativity is gone. If being a person with boundaries, feelings, and a sense of self-respect is negative, then I am the most negative person on the planet. And I'm starting to realize that's okay. I'd rather be negative and alone than positive and humiliated. I'm 30. I have a whole life ahead of me. I could find someone who doesn't need a group chat's permission to love me. I could find someone who stands up when a bigot speaks, regardless of how cool that bigot is. I could find someone who would be proud to propose to me in the middle of a crowded room, not because he has to, but because he can't imagine the world not knowing I'm his. But I'm still stuck on that one question. Should I try one last time? Is there a version of therapy that can perform a spine transplant? Or am I just looking for an excuse to stay in the pain I know, because the freedom I don't know is so terrifying? I look at the empty space on the wall where our calendar used to be, the one where we marked down our future. It's blank now, just like the rest of my life. And for the first time, I'm starting to think that a blank page is better than a story written by Mark. The silence in the house has become a physical presence, something I have to navigate around like a piece of furniture that wasn't there before. It's funny how you can spend years screaming to be heard, only to realize that the most painful thing isn't the argument. It's the quiet that follows when the other person simply stops pretending to listen. I've been sitting in this quiet for weeks now, trying to decipher the static in my own head. Am I the villain? Am I the controlling, negative wife that Mark and Lily and Nina have painted me to be? Or am I just a woman who asked for the bare minimum of respect and was told that my price was too high? I keep going back to the year of the lie, the year he spent texting Sarah behind my back. That wasn't just a lapse in judgment. It was a blueprint for our entire marriage. It taught me, early on, that his loyalty was a flexible thing, something that could be bent and folded to fit whatever room he happened to be standing in. When he told her that I was the reason he had to stop talking to her, he wasn't just protecting his image. He was setting a precedent. He was telling the world, and himself, that I was an obstacle to be managed, rather than a partner to be cherished. And yet, I stayed. I stayed through the smell jokes. I stayed through the comments about my heritage. I stayed while Lily tried to claim his lap as her own personal territory. I stayed because I believed in the us that eloped. I believed that if I just loved him enough, if I was just patient enough, he would eventually see that the boys weren't his family. I was. But a man like Mark doesn't let go of his disciples that easily. Mark is the kind of person who feeds on the insecurity of others. He needs a circle of men who are perpetually stuck in a state of arrested development, men who value a vibe more than a vow. I watched him do it to Alex, and I watched him do it to my husband. He'd whisper about how I was changing him, how I was taking him away, when all I was actually doing was asking him to show up for the life we had supposedly built together. The January breakup felt like a scripted ending to a play I didn't know I was starring in. When he came back from that meeting with Mark, his eyes were different. They were empty. It was like the man I eloped with had been replaced by a shell that had been filled with Mark's opinions. He told me everything was fine, but fine was just the word he used to describe the moment he stopped fighting for us. He had reached a consensus with his board of directors, Mark, the roommate, the group, and the verdict was that I was too much work. I was negative. I was difficult. I was the girl who ruined the party by expecting her husband to act like he was married. So, here I am, 30 years old, separated, and staring at the ruins. And I'm still asking the same question. Should I try therapy? Should I try to fix this? Is it possible to fix a man who doesn't see a problem with his friends being racist toward his wife? Is it possible to fix a man who lets another woman sit on his lap because he's too afraid of being uncool to say no? Is it possible to fix a marriage where the third, fourth, and fifth wheels are more important than the steering wheel? I want to believe in therapy. I want to believe that a professional could sit him down and perform an exorcism of Mark's influence. I want to believe that if he just saw it all laid out on a whiteboard, the lies, the microaggressions, the lack of boundaries, he would have an epiphany. He would fall to his knees and realize that he's been throwing away a diamond for a handful of gravel. But therapy requires two people who are willing to look at their own reflections. And my husband hasn't looked in a mirror in years. He's too busy looking at Mark to see if he's doing it right. I've had to face the reality of who he is when I'm not there to hold up the mask for him. He's back with them now. He didn't go into hiding. He didn't take time to mourn the death of our forever. He went straight back to the sports bars and the group chats. He went back to the people who cheered when I was finally pushed out of the circle. He's probably sitting there right now, laughing at a joke about Indian people, relieved that there's no one left to tell him it's not funny. The leaked messages from Nina still burn. It's the ultimate violation of a person's inner sanctum, to have your most private fears, the ones you only admit to someone you think is a friend, broadcast to the very people you're afraid of. It's a social execution. And my husband didn't just witness my execution, he handed them the rope. He told me I was the one who made it impossible to defend me. But he never defended me when it was possible. He never defended me when it was easy. He never defended me when it was just him and me in a room, and I was crying because his friends made me feel like an outsider in my own skin. If he wouldn't defend me then, why would he defend me when the stakes were high? I'm struggling with the AITA of it all because I did react harshly. I said things I regret. I lashed out at Nina. I called them names. I allowed my pain to turn into a weapon. And in doing so, I gave them the proof they needed to justify their hatred of me. I became the crazy wife they always said I was. But what do you expect from a person who has been poked and prodded and mocked for years? Eventually, the person who is being bullied is going to swing back. And the moment they do, the bully always plays the victim. I look at my life now and I see two paths. One leads back to him, to more low-key promises, more delayed proposals, more Saturday nights of feeling invisible while he tries to impress Mark. The other path leads into the unknown. It leads to a life where I am the only person I have to answer to. It leads to a world where my heritage isn't a punchline and my boundaries aren't negativity. I genuinely don't know if I can save this marriage, because a marriage isn't a solo mission. You can't be the only one holding the rope while the other person is busy tying it into a noose. I'm struggling to accept that maybe, just maybe, the love we had wasn't a foundation at all. It was just a beautiful facade on a house that was already condemned. He was my person. He was the man I chose to elope with. But he wasn't the man who chose me back. He chose the vibe. He chose the boys. He chose Mark. And now, I have to choose myself. Standing in the wreckage of a marriage is a surreal experience. You spend so much of your life building a structure, brick by brick, promise by promise, that when it finally collapses, you're left wandering through the dust, trying to find anything that's still intact. I've spent the last few months digging through that dust, looking for a reason to stay, looking for a sign that I was wrong about him, about Mark, about everything, but all I keep finding are the shards of a woman I don't recognize anymore. I think about the AITA question a lot. Am I the asshole for reacting emotionally when my private life was weaponized against me? For saying harsh things to people who had been whispering behind my back for years? For wanting my husband to be a husband instead of a bro? When I first posted my story, I was looking for a way to fix it. I was looking for someone to tell me, just go to therapy and he'll finally understand. I wanted a magic wand that would turn my husband into a man with a spine. But as I've narrated this journey to you, as I've laid out every microaggression, every lie about an ex, and every time he chose a vibe over my dignity, I've realized something terrifying. You can't fix a man who thinks your pain is an inconvenience. If he wanted to be with me, he would be here. He wouldn't be at a sports bar with Mark. He wouldn't be laughing with Nina, the girl who betrayed me. He wouldn't be allowing Lily to treat him like a piece of furniture. If he valued our marriage, he wouldn't have needed a meeting with his best friend to decide whether or not to stay. He would have looked at the woman who eloped with him, the woman who shared her life and her heart with him, and he would have said, I don't care what they think, I choose you. But he didn't. He never did. From the very beginning, I was a secret he was trying to keep from his real life. The elopement wasn't a romance. It was a hiding place. The public proposal wasn't a promise. It was a bribe to keep me quiet while he figured out how to manage his friends' disapproval. I'm 30 years old, and I'm starting to realize that the most negative thing I ever did was believe that I was the problem. I'm not too sensitive. I'm not too controlling. I'm just a human being who was asking for a basic level of loyalty that he was simply incapable of providing. So, to anyone listening to this, to anyone who has ever felt like they were the crazy one for having boundaries, I want to ask you, what would you do? Would you keep fighting for a man who won't even hold your hand in a room full of people who hate you? Or would you walk away and realize that the negativity he's been complaining about is actually just your self-respect trying to claw its way back to the surface. I've decided that I'm done performing CPR on a ghost. I'm done trying to save a marriage that he's already replaced with a Saturday night bender. I'm going to take the lessons I've learned, the hard, painful, expensive lessons, and I'm going to build a life where I am the priority. A life where my culture is celebrated, not mocked. A life where my partner is my defender, not my greatest critic. If you've ever been in a situation like this, or if you have an opinion on whether I'm making the right choice by walking away instead of pushing for therapy, please let me know in the comments. I'm still navigating this, and hearing your perspectives helps more than you know. And if you want to hear more stories about people finding the strength to choose themselves, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We're all just trying to figure out how to be the main characters in our own lives again. As for me, I'm finally putting the ring away and turning the elopement photos face down. And for the first time in years, I'm looking forward to a Saturday night where the only vibe I have to worry about is my own peace.